Well, let's just jump in. Why don't you tell us a little bit
Perfect.
about yourself and your company? And
Sure. So a little bit about me. I'd like to do a Twitter length, if you will, biography.
sure.
Trained as an engineer at MIT and worked for my professor, Dr. Bose, M.R. Bose, of the audio company fame. I basically went to MIT to really study the, if you will, the confluence of acoustics and electronics. I enjoyed that, the period at MIT, learned a lot, and then started working for Dr. Bose and had the opportunity to do research. And I'd like to come back to this, but the notion of, how do you create something totally new to the world and get it to market? It's not, as you know, it's not a straight line. It's
Never is. Never is.
exactly, and you're making sudden right turns that you didn't know about. Anyway, I helped with that program, and then I was chief engineer, so I oversaw all of their product development activities, ranging from OEM work with GM and Mercedes to music systems and the wave radio and a whole bunch of other things. I was interested in really doing my own thing, so I started a management consulting. I had great prospects at Bose, but I really wanted to try to do something new and different. So I started a management consulting company, and we had some fabulous projects, and one was putting in the Apple new product process,
Oh, yeah,
ANPP.
I'd really like to hear more about that if you can.
Yeah.
If you
Oh,
can reveal
sure.
it.
I can certainly describe what's public about it.
Mhm.
And that was very, very interesting project. I and Chris, you may be here, burnt out on travel. I was doing 200,000 miles by June.
Wow,
It
unbelievable.
was too much. And so I sold my firm to my partners and then did some stints at being a CEO, and then having an idea around a boutique investment bank. So I started an investment banking company. From there, an associate of mine and I hatched an idea for a roll-up in the consumer electronics area. So I went from consulting to be a principal in a private equity play, and was CTO at the Klipsch Group, which is the roll-up that we did, American loudspeaker company that we really amplified and made global.
Nice.
And yeah, that was certainly a nice project for sure. I actually think private equity has a really bad rap. Some of it's deserved, but not all of
Mhm.
it. I was an investment professional with Vantage Point for a while. They funded the deal. And then I bifurcated, so I'm on the board of Cirrus Logic, which is a semiconductor firm that basically powers audio in the mobile handset environment, and working on consulting in the area of new product development and portfolio management. Um, Not at the project level, but at the aggregate, or let's say division level or at corporate level, helping managers and teams work together more effectively.
Mhm. Mhm.
That includes, if you will, a lot of what you do around portfolio management, innovation management, the fuzzy front end, product definition, all the way to getting products out to the market, and basically helping executives do things better and faster in the area of new products. And that's what I currently do, based here in Menlo Park, California.
Right. So you're focused on the near term. So these are things that can, these are products and technologies that are here today and can be rolled out relatively quickly.
Yeah, I would say I've done a fair amount of work in the medical technology area, and that's often not the case due to regulatory approval and the complexity of doing products involving life sciences. But in the examples that I just cited for you, for sure. In fact, I don't think there's a single case where there was technology invention required.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this had to do with product innovation, but using known and tested products. Most of the risks were market risks. So
Mm-hmm.
you're absolutely right. These were, if you look at the traditional diagrams that people create in the 2x2 matrix, of course. We have market risk and technology risk. And well, Chris, you know all about this, but in general, companies avoid taking both risks at the same time. So the implementations that I did were definitely in one vector or another.
Right. So is there any particular market that you specialize in? You just mentioned medical, but it seems like you've got a varied experience in all sorts of different spaces. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. Not pharma. I don't work in the
Mm-hmm.
pharma area. That's very true. I'm doing work with an insurance company, which is pretty unusual. But usually my clients are either B2B or B2C consumer internet companies, tech companies, or medical device. Those are kind of the strongest areas, but I work in telecom and office equipment, a whole range of areas from pure software to pure hardware. Most everything is in between. And what's really interesting, it's not really relevant to our conversation right now, is this. So I work in a lot of programs where we put in structures above, let's say, Agile or Waterfall or whatever. And it's really interesting to note the amount of religion that's used in the implementation of Agile programs. It's absolutely takes on epic proportions. But I've recently come to the realization, not popular realization, that eventually, at least for all public companies, they run by waterfalls, not Agile. So at some pace, you know, some layer in the organization, you have to face deadlines and so forth. But
well, isn't it true that one of the things about Agile is that it kind of circumvents a lot of the hierarchical decision-making processes that happen within organizations? So that's why there's a lot of embracing of Agile concepts, but when it comes right down to it, you know, it's like a little bit of an Agile mix happening within a larger waterfall organization.
yeah, and I actually think it's a brilliant Trojan horse, because basically what they're trying to address is what you just described, which is management meddling.
Mm-hmm.
And basically getting managers out of the way. And it's frankly, it's kind of a complex, heavyweight, process-driven intervention, which I think is basically, it can be okay, but it's the ends are to actually get management out of the loop. So
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Well,
and it works pretty well.
But the downside is that management's afraid of it, because you know, on the flip side, you get management out of the loop, but then you bring customers into the loop. And that's
Right.
like the worst possible combination, because you're reducing management control and you're increasing sort of customer control. And it's
That
like,
is really fantastic that you say that. That is a beautiful codification of the risk that companies face when they go to the Agile kind of approach. I would say, though, that because the amount of artifacts that Agile teams deliver in terms of burn down charts and stories and so forth, there's still a degree of oversight. But the essence of what you say is exactly true. I think, and the customer interaction, I think, is great, especially when it's unfiltered by a head of product, or and to get the engineers and people in development really in close contact with the customers, just so long as they ask questions. Is a
yeah,
really good
exactly. But you have the right customers in the room. You have to have the right customers in the room.
That's also true. And you know, one thing that's really interesting, because I work in this area all the time, is that when people are thinking about, well, doing design thinking, another technique that you and I are very aware of, or other customer requirements gathering, they don't visit lost customers, and they don't visit non-customers. And it's like, come on,
Yeah,
you need to look at why you don't sell to those people and talk to them. So yes, but getting right people is important.
Well, that's the thing that I always find interesting when people talk about design thinking. They're talking about, you know, heavy customer involvement in product development, right? But can you actually look back and say any of these super disruptive products ever came out of design thinking? I mean, did the iPhone come out of design thinking? No, it would like sprung fully formed from Steve Jobs's and his team's head, and then became a huge hit. Did Twitter come out of design thinking? No, it was a skunkworks project at Odeo. So like, can we connect design thinking with disruptive new innovation? Maybe not.
Yeah, that's a terrific point. And Well, if you have expressed a point of view on that, I agree with you.
Hmm.
And I really am a big believer in customer contact and insight. However, and this was true at Bose when we worked on the noise canceling headphones, you don't talk to customers about the breakthrough parts. The breakthrough parts don't come from customers, but you can avoid boneheaded mistakes without talking to the customers at some point. And
Yeah.
so, although I would say you're absolutely right about the genius of the iPhone, which follows the genius of the iPod, which follows the genius of putting, music and rights with storage and a great ecosystem, that all these are breakthroughs thoughts. But let's say, how to put the right finish on an iPhone, or what the shape should be, or at that point, getting customer feedback, I think, is useful. But it's on the small stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right. So, but I mean, that's where people are going. Whenever there's hard times like this, right, which of course came into us out of the blue,
Right.
all these corporates always fall back on just incremental changes to try and grab a few bucks here and there, as opposed to thinking about real disruptive future changes. So that's when it's great. Let's bring it. Let's do some more design thinking, because really all we're doing is trying to grow organically as opposed to grow in a major way.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair to design thinking and also to Agile, they both have many attributes. The customer involvement in general is a positive. So I really think that that's the right thing to do. But, putting this stuff on a pedestal and saying, in fact, it's our savior, it's not. The great innovations aren't going to come from them, but they can give you refinement ideas or application ideas or servicing ideas, all sorts of other ideas that make the product better, but they don't get it on the map.
Yeah, I mean, the story that really did it for me is pop sockets. Did you ever see that
No,
documentary on how pop sockets were invented? It was really
no.
cool. So apparently, the inventor had trouble with his his earbuds. Right? He wanted to store his earbuds with his phone. So he invented this thing, and he tried it a bunch of different iterations, but eventually ended up with two of them on the back of his phone, and he would wrap the earbud around them. Right? And then before he took it to market, he actually gave it to a bunch of his friends and family and said, "Here, play with it, and then come back to me in 2 weeks." And then 2 weeks later, he found out that they weren't using it at all to store their earbuds, but they were using it as a stand and as a hold. And he pivoted to market it as a stand and a hold, and boom, that's where that's how it was invented. So it's like a beautiful story of sort of like the breakthrough came out of his head, but then he tempered it with customer input to figure out like where it would fit. And if you think about it, a lot of out of that sort of thing, where there's this really great inventive idea, and then it's tempered by the market, which says, you know what, maybe we'll use it for X instead of Y, or maybe it's good for but it's awesome. So it's like it, that might be the two-step process. We don't start with the customer, we start with the idea and then give it to the customer. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
No, it's quite relevant. And when working on the noise canceling headphones back at Bose, we had a similar kind of story, but it was a little bit unpredicted at the time. And that was that when we came up with this idea, its focus was on fidelity. In other words, by doing what we did, by putting feedback around the system and doing error correction and minimization, we thought it'd generate better bass, more consistent from user to user, less distortion, all these other benefits. And that's what we optimized for in the first year. Then we had an opportunity to get some feedback. We went to Oshkosh, the private air show in Wisconsin that's done every year with all the private pilots there looking at the newest gizmos. And also worked with the Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and at Aberdeen Proving Grounds for personal carrier, essentially tanks without weapons. And what we found is that people valued the noise reduction. It wasn't actually the improved fidelity. We were totally wrong. I mean, it did that, but people didn't care about it. And so
Yeah.
that's the other insight that I think we all get from customer contact, is that even the inventor doesn't necessarily know what about, well, this is actually true in the story you just described about the pop socket, in that the inventor came up with this concept, but putting it in the hands of consumers, he was told how to position it. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what happened. The noise cancellation was not the main feature.
Not originally. No. When we first, and it's this is another thing about innovation. I think you've certainly seen. I know it's absolutely true, which is luck and fate. When I came out of school, I was working on 2 projects. He was like mentoring me, and I was essentially his arms and legs in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
And we were working on 2 projects in parallel. And I said one day, after working on them both, one was optimizing a loudspeaker in different spaces, making it more consistent. And the other was working on these headphones that had better fidelity. And so I said, I'm making much faster progress on the headphones. And he said, well, let's just focus on that. So we completely dropped the other project.
Nice.
And there's 2, and I have no idea how things would have turned out had we worked on the loudspeaker. That's an experiment we can't do. But what I can tell you is that one big part of innovation is 2 things wrapped up in that story. One is luck, that you in fact picked something that in fact was going to work and be a mover and shaker. But the other is focus.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where you stand on this 20% time, which Google did not invent, by the way. Although
No, I completely agree with that. I completely
success has many fathers, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, really the central point is that I believe that innovation requires focus. I don't know what you've seen in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think a lot of people disregard how much luck has to do with it, right? Because it's always after the fact, the successful entrepreneur goes, "Oh yeah, this is my path." So when it's almost like everything that the negative stuff is forgotten about, like all the wrong turns basically disappear, and go, "Well, look at how I masterfully came up with this product." And that is never the case. There's always the fuzzy spinning emptiness between the beginning and the end. That's
Yes.
always the case.
Well, there's this saying, Louis Pasteur, I think, said this, which is luck favors the prepared mind. In other words, you have to have the kind of the right set and setting, but then serendipity happens for sure.
Yeah. So it seems like, to me, it seems like your offering of sort of looking at the product innovation and adjacency is probably pretty compelling to a lot of companies, right? I mean, corporate innovators are like, this is great. And it's like, on the one hand, there's this tension to come up with something, amazingly different. I remember there was one period of time when almost everybody was saying billion-dollar invention, billion-dollar invention, billion-dollar product, billion-dollar. So it's like all these CEOs were saying, it's not disruptive if it's not a billion-dollar product. But the reality is that most of the innovation doesn't occur there. It occurs in incremental changes that hit the bottom line almost immediately, right? And that's the space that you're playing in right now.
Yeah. So you said a number of things, Chris, I think are really important. The first thing that I really picked out is kind of where companies look for innovation and how they nurture that. I'd almost say that many of the folks that we work with are trying to just get predictability.
Mm-hmm.
And these are big companies. So
Yep.
the fact is that we're kind of far away from really innovating, even if they're mid or near term, because the organization can't set and meet their commitments. So that's often where we start. But the other thing that you mentioned, which I think is really also important, is this billion-dollar threshold. Because Chris, I've heard this as well from many clients, like, well, we're just not going to pursue small ideas. We just don't have time for that. Well, how do you know? I mean, you're so early on. It's, these things take 5 or 7 or 10 years to really come to fruition. So I see that barriers killing a lot of innovation for sure. You know, we can't explore it unless it's a $250 million project in the second year. And what happens is you suffocate the ideas that can in fact be that big or bigger.
Yeah, things take a lot longer to grow than are expected, but everybody's there for the short term, right? Everyone wants the short term gain over the the long term massive result.
Yeah.
So
This is one reason why I really recommend to firms that they invest about 10% of their new product development or R&D spend line in advanced concepts.
mhm.
And you just need that kind of investment year after year after year. Otherwise, you exactly encourage this kind of, well, we want a one-hit wonder, so let's try here. It's going to be $1 billion. Whoop, that didn't work. They switch, and everything becomes kind of zero-based budgeting, where every entrepreneur, internal entrepreneur with a great idea, has to pitch for funding, which from a budget that doesn't exist. And all the middle managers have their budgets, and they don't want someone new horning in on their headcount.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what I found is that it's a really good idea, whether it's 10% or 8% or 3% or 15% of R&D, but having some fraction of the budget in new products built at least for your middle time horizon, in my opinion.
yeah. No, I agree with you 100%. But the other problem there is that even if you do put that in place, what happens to the product that shows some promise? A lot of times there's no place for it in the organization, right? I had this happen to me over and over and over again when I was working with Yahoo. It's like they would come up with this fantastic new product. They would release it because, I mean, I was working with their brick house operation, which basically is like their internal incubator where they would throw ideas, and there would be like a small team of people who would just develop something and then release it.
Yep.
And they would release these fantastic ideas, really cool, interesting, disruptive concepts. And then after about a month or two, they would just shut them down because there was no, even if they had traction, there was no appetite within the organization to keep it going, or no resources or whatever. So it's like the team that built it just wanted to get onto something else that was new. And when they tried to pass it off internally to another organization to keep it going, there was no takers. There were no takers, even though there was an audience for it. Have you seen that happen?
Absolutely. Ideas are fragile, and they're often antibodies, and they are unpredictable, and siphon funds away from marketing or operations or whatever that's already got a plan to do things. So and in fact, I'm working with a project, believe it or not, with an insurance company on this very same matter, which is that they've got ideas, but how do you get it into IT if you're not in the IT budget? It's kind of the same problem. We recently worked with a high-tech company where we put in a venture board, very similar to what you described at the brick house of Yahoo. But one of the things we did is we seeded the executive team with downstream players, head of IT and the head of customer success and marketing, so that and now they didn't direct these efforts, but what they did do is say, when the time comes and when you think you're ready, this is what needs to be this is what needs to happen. For example, access to data analytics or other areas of, let's say, connection and interface with other, let's say, programs, that you need to anticipate that. So, and I think that's fair game. What's not fair game is to have these downstream organizations meddle in the concept. So I found that if you can kind of allow for a socialization process, it's very important to acknowledge that these downstream organizations actually heard you. And the last thing is, we really recommend, and I think you would probably agree, that you'd like the entrepreneur to follow the idea into the life cycle and nurturing and then growth and scaling. Because to do a strict handoff, you're right, it's rare that goes well.
Oh yeah, absolutely, that has to happen. So that kind of leads me to my next question: is that what happens to I completely forgot what I was going to say. So the entrepreneur follows the idea into the next section, and
Right.
there automatically a budget allocated at that time
Yes.
for the, okay, so it's allocated by that initial group saying, okay, you need to take this to product, and you've got a marketing budget, you've got operations, all of that stuff is pre-allocated.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So,
100%. No, I'd be making that up if that were the case. But at least there's earmarked a level of effort kind of budget to anticipate the forthcoming ideas and transfer. Otherwise, it's a zero-sum game, and you're going to lose that.
yeah.
Absolutely going to lose that.
So here's a question I sent. How do you answer the ROI on innovation question? Because we get that all the time, and it's like, how can I tell you the ROI on a product which we have no idea? We don't know anything about the market. We don't know anything about the adoption. We don't know anything about anything, but you still want me to come back and say, what's the ROI of this idea? How do you answer that question?
It's the wrong question to ask. And I'm not ducking it. I'm not ducking it. It's too early to ask.
Exactly.
So in the construct that I just described to you, where we had this venture board, we also created this, what we call the discovery area, a protected space from corporate antibodies that would have this budget allocated towards their nurturing of new ideas. And there's criteria to flow into the discovery space, sort of called, and for the idea team to really move to this. And they're very basic questions. They have nothing to do with ROI, but more like, is this aligned with our strategy, our product strategy and vision? Is this a big market? In other words, are you looking at opportunities that have big potential? And then the discovery space, if you will, gives them time to iterate, get customer feedback, if it's internet-based, to get growth in monthly or daily users and collect data, and then frame out an ROI when they exit the discovery area and move into more known product development. But if asked early, well, forecasting revenue is the hardest thing to do. So what do you do for the forecast? Both bottom up and top down methods are erroneous in different ways. And so you've got a situation where you've got to say, well, I've got a great team. So we have a list of just a few criteria. You know, do you have an entrepreneurial idea person? Is this aligned with the company in terms of its strategy? Does it fit our distribution channel? Is it differentiable? Okay, then we're gonna satisfy those hurdles, go iterate, go work with customers, do design thinking, whatever. But by the time you get out of discovery, we're gonna be looking for a business case at that point. And in general, organizations that I've worked with often use financial hurdles, and I'd be interested to know of what you've seen. But many organizations that I use two metrics. One might be first full year's revenue, to just give them an idea of scale, and it needs to be a certain level, not $1 billion, but a certain level. And the second is, what is the anticipated return on investment, or ROI? You know, this is early days, but by the time you exit discovery, you should have a pretty good idea of what the development requirements are, and therefore you can rough out what the investment is, including launch costs, and then you can pencil out with great uncertainty the revenue, and then you can compute the ROI or IRR, whatever metric that you're trying to do.
So it sounds like the discovery phase, is it a phase, or is it?
I call it a space because it basically protects teams from the corporate antibodies. And I'll give you a really cool example of this. We did virtual skunkworks. And how did we do that? We removed Slack and all the corporate email from their accounts. They have all new Slack channels, and basically we protected it electronically. So we isolated these people electronically into this area of discovery.
That's awesome. So it's almost like an internal incubator, right?
It is. It is. I would say it's exactly that, except, well, there's an earmarked budget for an incubator. I would say it's very analogous depending on how the incubation is done, but also with foresight to make sure it's aligned with the receiving organizations and so forth. But I would say it's quite analogous to an incubation. It's kind of the nuts and bolts of how we implemented the incubation program. I'd agree
Right.
with that.
Right. So in the last little while, I've had clients who've said, you know what, we're not going to do anything until we have a business case. So come up with the idea, but you need to generate a business case before we'll, write one line of code. What do you say to that? Is it just, hey, that's a non-starter, or?
My straight answer is fire middle management. Really, they're the death of companies.
Well, yeah,
So
you're absolutely right. Because if you think about it, the people are on top, they get it, and the people at the bottom, they get it. But these people in the middle, they just don't get it.
that's right. Their whole role in companies is to reduce risk and manage the bureaucracy. I hate it. I mean, they're absolutely the sand in the gears in projects that I work on, because you're right,
Yeah.
you've got executive alignment and you've got motivation from the troops. So these bozos don't get out of the way. So I'm sorry to dodge your question that way, but it's kind of, well, maybe not get rid of them, but certainly neutralize them. So one of the things that we did in this discovery area, protected space, was that we really made sure that they were fully buffered from the other environments that existed in the organization, and didn't have middle managers saying, no, no, no. No, we had a budget allocated, and it's overseen by the executives, and we don't need your help. And so I think I'm not diminishing your problem. It's actually very real, and I think it's a tough one to solve unless you make changes organizationally to do so, or at least fence them off.
Well, you mentioned something in there that is also something I've been hearing over and over again, is about risk, right? And yeah, they're interested in de-risking innovation. I thought that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. There's no such thing as de-risked innovation, because innovation is risk, right? It's like saying, two things, they're mutually exclusive. I mean, can you actually have riskless innovation?
I don't think so. I think middle managers tend to be so risk averse, but the fact of the matter is that you have no idea how these things are actually going to unfurl. And usually the investment that people are making in these innovative products are relatively small. Most organizations can scale. It might turn out to be 1% of revenue, something like that. Relatively modest budgets, but they certainly can afford that. But that needs to be allocated to the teams, not the middle managers, to perpetuate status quo. And on the risk, so maybe there's a slight difference. No, I don't think there's any difference, but there is a expression that says that product development is a reduction of risk over time. And I think that's an apt description. But before you can actually schedule something or know about it in a systematic way, it's highly risky. And it's just you're placing a bet on the future. And I totally agree. There's no getting around that. You can't de-risk innovation. What you can do is make sure it's aligned with the distribution, aligned with the corporate culture, and so forth. You can ensure those, but other than that, you're absolutely right. Innovation is risky.
Right. So when you hear of companies that they generate tons of ideas, so they go through all of these processes, they even do proofs of concept, and then nothing ever comes out of it. Like there's never any product at the end. Is that just innovation theater?
Well, there are all these silly rule of thumbs, like 1 out of 10 or whatever. It's a totally undocumented numbers, but most innovative work is wasted. It will not produce an output. So you have to basically expect that, this is an investment. It's a numbers game. And this gets to a real problem that many companies face, companies that I'm close to face as well, is scaling too quickly. So let's say there's an idea. It's a really good idea, but maybe there's technical risk. So they, build up the team to 100. But they actually haven't solved some of the most fundamental problems. So you've got this burn rate, of $30 million a year it's a monster you got to feed, and it occludes other investments in innovations that you should be making. So Chris, I see a very, very common tendency for executives to overscale and overscope new ventures, which suffocates the other more delicate innovations that should also be nurtured.
But isn't that aren't we just empire building at that point? Because again, we talk about, we get into politics again. It's like I'm running this innovation group, and oh look, I have 300 people, I have 3,000 people, and I'm working on all these projects. And is there ever? I mean, I'm sure that there's an intention to get these out the door, but so few actually do, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's fundamental. And yeah, there's something about, well, I think headcount is linked to power and budget and your compensation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always been my goal is to have the highest compensation without any employees. But other people, they're wired differently, and they like changing diapers and all the things that go along with being a manager. And you're right, Chris, unfortunately, a real common disease is the need to have headcount.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
Well, that kind of reminded me of something to do with so like this, if the groups. See, I've lost my train of thought again. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So you've seen these sort of things happen in organizations as well. I mean, is there a particular type of organization? Is there a particular age of organization, particular size of organization where this is more likely to happen?
You mean the headcount issue, or what specifically?
Oh no, the sort of like the theater where.
Oh yeah. Uh, um, I think it's middle-sized and above, maybe $250 million and above. Where there are where there are multiple managers. So
Mm-hmm.
the way I would describe it is these problems start when managers start managing managers, which is typically directors. So once the company gets to the point where I have directors, it gets political.
Right.
I know this is a gross generalization, but that's certainly what I found. And you can't paint all organizations with the same brush because there's real variation out there. But when you have managers who manage managers, I think you've crossed into the headcount really matters zone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who's got at a meeting, who's got the biggest business card, stuff like that.
Right. So I was reading. I don't know if have you read Loon Shots by any chance?
No, I've heard
Loon
of it.
Shots.
It
It's a
sounds
great book.
Canadian.
No, it's
It's not related to the loony, huh?
no, not
Okay.
related to Looney at all.
Okay.
It's a really interesting book because he talks about innovation in government versus innovation in corporate enterprises. And one of his key points is that the reason why we don't get a lot of disruptive innovation in corporates is because we're compensating incorrectly, right? I mean, we compensate people within corporates by giving them, promoting them into a higher level role, manager, director, VP, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where the rewards are in building your career path, not in building, disruptive new services or stuff from new products. So he was contrasting with it was NASA, DARPA, a bunch of government agencies where the researchers weren't really interested in becoming managers, directors, and above. They were more interested in let's build some cool stuff, right? And so his reasoning that the reason why corporates aren't very innovative is because they're all still in sort of stuck into that hierarchical conditioning people to schmooze with their boss to get more money, as opposed to building cool products to get more money. Have you seen that?
No, I understand it and I recognize it can be true. But I don't know that I've really seen that because I don't do any work for the government.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare. So it's hard for me to contrast those two organizations. What you say very well may be true.
Have you seen effective compensation that really drives more innovation?
That's a really good question. I don't think I can answer, but give me a second here.
Okay.
Actually, no, I don't think innovation is driven by money per se,
Hmm.
at least in the early stages. So I would, this is generalization, but I would say that recognition is probably the most important thing for many innovators, whether it's within the company or without. And so I would focus on non-financial um, compensation or awards that really are much more aligned with, really singling this person out. They've really prevailed. We've got a meritocracy. Here's some really smart people who've done really great things, and they get to stand on the stage. I think that means a lot, as well as outside the company, where they can be recognized as really creating a new path. So I
Hmm.
guess I'd have to rely on that. I mean, that's very different from what's fair versus what motivates. So if it's what's fair, then you might say, I believe there should be a percentage of revenue or some linkage to its success. It could even be modest. I know in my situation at Bose, you get $1 for every patent. So I got $1 promised for the headphone patent, but I never
Nice.
the dollar.
Never got the dollar.
So, but no, what have you found? Have you found any kind of compensation levers working positively for innovation?
You're absolutely right. The number one is recognition. Number one is recognition, because a lot of times these individuals who come up with these ideas, I mean, they're not really entrepreneurial, but they are great problem solvers, right? And they don't want to take their idea and they want to go somewhere and be super successful. They love working for the company they're working for. In fact, the reason why they came up with this idea is because they want to improve the company. They want to improve the processes, improve the products, improve the bottom line. So they generate these ideas, and then if they don't get recognition within the organization, that's when it's like, okay, well, I'm going to stop generating ideas, because I'm not doing it for the money. I'm not doing it for myself. I'm actually doing it to assist the company. And when I don't get any kind of recognition for it, then why should I? Right.
Right,
So
right.
recognition is the number one. And then as soon as you start adding any kind of compensation, I can understand the dollar, as opposed to some of the companies I've worked for that do targeted IP programs. They give like $2,000 awards for issued
Yeah.
patents, and sometimes you would get people who would just that's what they do all day long. It's like they would freaking
Really?
their
Oh
day
my
job,
God. Uh-huh.
forget about their day job, and just keep generating patents and throwing them in and hoping that they were going to get issued, so they can get that nice big bonus at the end of the period. So, like, money kind of messes up innovation. I think as soon as you start bringing those two things together, it changes. It kind of warps it a bit.
Well, that's
Because I think
really interesting.
most innovators, as far as I know, the best ones, they don't really look at the compensation. They look at it from how can I improve my life? How can I improve my customer's life? How can I improve things? Like I'm trying to improve something, right? Or make it better. And just the fact that this thing is out there in the world and is improving things, that is like great compared to compensation. At least that's what I found.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I believe, and it's related to what you say, that it's recognition and making a difference. I think
Hmm.
legacy is really important for most people, and they want to believe that their time on Earth actually, tilted the axis in a little more favorable way. And so, seeing how it made a difference in some way, I think, is also really great. It is, I guess, under the recognition kind of umbrella, but it's a little bit more abstract. But for example, if you see your product you invented and you see it, people using it or talking about it, I think these are really great rewards.
Oh yeah, no question. The only downside is that in a lot of these organizations, these ideas never end up going anywhere, and you've got the negative problem where even the communication is like, I'm always saying that these inventors, they're you need to really listen to them. You need to help them. You need to care for them, because eventually, if you don't care for them, if you don't communicate to them, if you don't respond to them, even if you say to them, that's a great idea, but we're not going to do it, or that isn't such a great idea, it's not really a fit for what we do, even if they hear no, at least it got communicated to, instead of a big black hole where it just disappears and nobody gets back to them or says anything. And then, you know, I had a situation at Yahoo where we had this inventor. He was a fantastic inventor. He came up with all these great ideas. We filed IP, and he actually wanted to move some of these into product. So he started on his own, talking to different product organizations to see if somebody would pick it up. And then about a year later, we bought a company that did it. And basically built the same product, paid the founder of the company something like $5 billion, some insane amount. And they brought him in as an employee. So it's like, what do you think this inventor is going to think? You just took an idea very similar to mine, and you paid some external person $5 billion, or multiples of my salary, to bring this into the organization. And I had come up with this idea a year ago, but you guys wouldn't move on it. And I saw that happen over and over and over again, because there's of this penchant, we talked about it before, for companies to look outside for innovation instead of looking internally. Yes. And I don't know how to get over that hump. I mean, do you have any ideas?
Well, it's hard. I think a lot of it goes back to culture, and you probably agree with this. There's what is the risk tolerance of a culture? How do they treat failed managers and failed people when there is a failure, not due to their own hard work, but just what happens to them? So I think if you do that, you're going to stifle a lot of innovation just from the get-go. And then when you describe the situation going outside, well, you and I do consulting and coaching and so forth, and we know that there's a element called a profit from another land, and there's some truth to that, in that a consultant is able to compare different environments, different companies, and really be able to give you a clear-eyed view of maybe the doability of something, or pitfalls to avoid, or what have you. But in the case that you describe, where you have an internal program that's basically not funded, and the organization turns around a year later and finds one and buys one, and someone gets huge, personal remuneration for it, that's a really unfortunate situation for the person that had the idea to begin with. There's probably some truth to say, well, this other individual built an organization, they built a brand, they actually did, we started this conversation, Chris, with, the pure innovation versus design thinking and so forth, and do real answers come from people and so forth, real insights, those real step changes. But in the case of this, where you buy, let's say, an outside organization, in general, they have de-risked all these things that you would find along the path. So they reduce the viscosity of your forward motion quite a bit, because they've gone through that path. So there is tuition that's paid not only for the idea, but also for the business propagation of it, and testing and refinement and so forth. So, but that doesn't diminish the bitter pill. I know.
Yeah. So, but if that's true, and basically what you're saying to me, it sounds like that we don't really need any corporate innovation groups, because all we really need is M&A, right? We need corporate strategy groups that scan the horizon looking for new acquisitions, and snap them up. Why do we even budget for internal innovation at all?
So okay, great question. I'm glad you asked it, because this defines the difference between what we did in discovery versus what you're proposing, or not proposing, but what exists in incubation programs. A good amount of funding went to corporate development. And the whole idea was you fund both. You fund internal developments, and you fund external ones. Now, external ones, all you need is a relatively small budget to do the due diligence and so forth. The actual investment is capitalized. But the whole notion is best of both worlds. You're going to get discontinuous innovation from an acquisition, more likely, and more aligned innovation by, a directed program. But you need both. I really, really believe you need both, and you're best served by doing both. And you're right, most companies don't think of M&A as, necessarily part of their arsenal, except in kind of spasmodic bursts where they buy a company opportunistically. But I really think that a kind of channeled, not focused, but a channeled scope in corporate development, and appropriate guardrails and funding is a really good idea. So I really would argue strongly that you do both.
So no, I agree with you. But is there a dividing line between disruptive and incremental then? Do we keep the incremental in-house and not even look at disruptive in-house and only look at the disruptive out-of-house and then maybe look at incremental out-of-house too?
This is another podcast.
I know we're running out of time, but we got to do this again because this has been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and you raise a whole bunch of questions there about what is truly incremental, and I've got actually some real thoughts on this this particular point, because these labels are inappropriate, frankly. But you know that.
Well, I tell you what, why don't we wrap up now? Tell us a little bit about how people can get in touch with you, and then we'll definitely have you on a future show.
Sure. Well, you can check out our little company at tcgen.com and learn a little bit more about what you're interested in the way of innovation. There are tools and assets you can download there, and hopefully it will help you on your journey.
Sounds good. All right.
Yeah.
If you could send me a bio, I'll drop it in the description with links and all that stuff. That'd be great.
Fabulous. This is really fun. Is this how you do your typical podcast?
Oh yeah,
just
absolutely.
Organically? Oh, that's great.
Yep. That's how I do it.
Of the past, I want to touch. We don't have time. I've got a meeting on the hour, but there are more things I'd like to share with you. But I will send my bio, a Twitter linked bio. I'll follow up with.
Perfect.
Do you need a photo, or you got that covered?
Yeah, photo would be good too.
Okay, I'll send it. This is a lot of fun, Chris. I'm really glad we had the conversation. And
me too.
I'd like to have one without recording between us.
We should definitely do that. Absolutely.
Great.
Okay, I'll let you go.
Super nice meeting you. Okay,
yeah, great
take
meeting
care.
you as well.
You bet. Bye-bye.